Senator Bob Menendez. Senator, it's a great pleasure to have you. It's my first opportunity to call you Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for being here. So we have a chicken and an egg situation with Iran. Who goes first? Do we lift the sanctions to get them back into compliance, pay them back what they demand for us having gotten out of it? Or do they have to get back under those caps and stop moving towards what could theoretically be a weapon before we do anything?
Well, I'm glad to see that the President's National Security Council is meeting and thinking about what is the pathway forward, what is the best one. We saw that after President Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018, his maximum pressure campaign didn't ultimately achieve the goal. Iran, by public reports, is maybe 3 months away from crossing the nuclear threshold. They have hunkered down, and they have not stopped destabilizing the region. And the result of all of that is not only has Iran marched closer to that threshold, but we lost our allies. We couldn't even get one vote. I mean, within the main Security Council colleagues, Great Britain, France, Germany, for example, to extend the weapons moratorium. So, at the end of the day, we ended up in a worse position. Now, I've never been and was not a supporter of the JCPOA, but I do believe that what we did walking away unilaterally was negatively consequential. So that's what the administration faces. I'm happy to be hearing the Secretary of State talking about something that is stronger and longer than the JCPOA. And so the challenge before the administration is not only the short time frame that they have to deal with Iran in the immediacy of that nuclear threshold, it's also about how do they deal with the other issues that Iran creates for us and for our allies in the region.
And in the president's speech yesterday, he again was very tough on Vladimir Putin, as he had been in the phone call, and as Secretary Blinken was certainly in his conversation with me last week. Yet Vladimir Putin has, of course, jailed Alexei Navalny, has shown nothing but defiance. Where do we stand? Would you now be in favor of considering sanctions against Putin's backers?
Well, absolutely. Look, I have been calling for those sanctions for most of the time of the Trump administration for a series of nefarious actions. The Skripal attacks using chemical weapons to try to assassinate your opponents, which should be subject under our law to chemical weapons sanctions, is something I've called for the past administration. I've said that to the Secretary of State. I'm sure, as I heard Jake Sullivan say yesterday, the National Security Advisor, that they will pursue a series of options for themselves at a time and place of their choosing. I hope that is sooner rather than later, because Putin only understands strength. And what he saw over the last 4 years is weakness. President Trump could never utter the words Russia or Vladimir Putin in a pejorative way. And so he has to know that the international community, it's not just us that has to be engaged. It has to be the international community that gets engaged and sends a very clear message to Putin and to the oligarchs around him that there are real consequences. And at the end of the day, you don't have access to our financial institutions.
Now, I want to also ask you about the COVID relief package and the budget resolution that was approved early this morning. Do you think, as Nancy Pelosi suggested just now outside the White House, that this is leverage and that you might persuade some Republicans, or do you think it's going to be another vote when it finally comes down to it, where it'll be the vice president casting the deciding vote?
Well, I hope that Republicans join us. I have a little history here. I was here during the beginning of the Great Recession, and I saw the time it took to get just a handful of Republicans to join us. And one of the lessons from that Great Recession is that we were too weak in our response. And so we had a long and painful recovery, and many Americans were left behind and many Americans lost their homes. I also remember when we tried to pass the Affordable Care Act, we spent months trying to get Republicans to join us in an effort. And at the end of the day, not one of them joined us. So there's a little bit of history here. The budget resolution that we passed last night in the wee hours of this morning, about 4 or 5 o'clock this morning, had 40 amendments that Republicans offered for the most part. I was disappointed that most of those amendments had nothing to do with COVID relief. It had nothing to do with girding the economy for the most part. It had all to do with immigration and other questions. So given the opportunity to be bipartisan, they chose not to focus on the most significant issue facing the American people, which is COVID. How do we end this virus, and how do we recover from the economic pain it has created on so many Americans across the country? They had a chance last night to show us what their ideas were as it relates to this, and I really think they failed last night. So the vice president came in, cast a deciding vote. Now that resolution goes to work to all the committees. There is once again an opportunity for bipartisanship. We outstretch our hands to them. I hope they'll take it and be constructive.
And I know we're going to be interrupted in a minute or so by the president giving a speech on the economy, but I want to give you a chance to comment on impeachment, because all of this is going to be sidelined pretty much in the Senate. At least the president's going to do other things. But for you all, you're going to be sitting and listening to the testimony or listening to the lawyers. What do you think? What are you hearing it can prove? Are you expecting a very short one-week trial?
Well, as a juror, I never know exactly what the House is going to present or the president is going to present.
And Senator, I am so sorry that the president has just come out, so I'm going to have to interrupt. And thank you so much for your indulgence.